Baltimore demonstration to junk the anti-terror law in the Philippines. I'm gonna get my voice warmed up, so I'm gonna start by going through some of the chants that you'll hear later. So just repeat after me. The first one, it goes junk, 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 terror bill. Junk, 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 terror bill. Oh, sorry, terror law. See, that's why we practice. So, let's say it all together. Junk, 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 terror law. Junk, 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 terror law. Junk, 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 terror law. Junk, junk, terror law. Wasn't that 4 times? Okay, pretty easy. All right, here's one. I think we all know this one. So it starts no justice, no peace. We can say no racist police. So second time, no justice, no peace. Stop the killings in the Philippines. Okay, try that. No justice, no peace. Racist police. No justice, no peace. Stop the killings in the Philippines. No justice, no peace. No racist police. No justice, no peace. Stop the killings in the Philippines. Okay. All right. And let's pick one more. This is going to come up a lot, so not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Duterte's crimes. Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Duterte's crimes. Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Duterte's crimes.
Awesome. So should we get started? Everybody is in place? All right. So thank you all for coming and taking part in the Global Day of Action against Duterte's anti-terror law. This action has been organized by the Baltimore chapter of the Malaya Movement. Malaya Movement is an organization that stands for human rights and democracy and against fascism and dictatorship in the Philippines. We want to recognize several organizations that have endorsed this action and are here with us today. Give it up for People Power Assembly, who has been tirelessly organizing the marches for Black Lives this past month. We also have Youth Against War and Racism. Yeah! And Socialist Unity Party. Woo! So this Global Day of Action was called by McKeldin International, an organization of Filipino migrant workers with chapters all over the world. They called it because of their grave concern for their families and friends left back in the Philippines and their disgust over the situation that Duterte has put the Philippines in, putting into question whether their hard decision and sacrifice leaving their families was worth it. Migrant Filipinos remit $33 billion to the Philippines. They did that in 2019 alone, basically keeping the Philippine economy afloat. So migrant Filipinos like us and their family have every right to have an opinion and to be critical of the direction Duterte is taking the Philippines in. To show their disgust, our disgust, for the 30,000 murdered under his drug war or his war against the poor, his mismanagement of the economy and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and now this escalating fascist and militarist response to criticism as reflected by the anti-terrorism, migrants, Filipino migrants, and their solidarity allies are taking to the streets. And today, in the U.S. alone, there are several cities holding protests. San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Chicago, Texas, New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. So we thought it was important to hold our own action here in Baltimore, because now, more than ever, we need people to become aware of what's going on in the Philippines. We need more people to show solidarity with the Filipino people and to understand the links between our struggles here and the struggles in the Philippines. So to help us in this effort, we have several speakers lined up who will highlight the grave human rights situation in the Philippines, express their opposition and outrage, especially for Duterte's latest moves to fast-track and sign the draconian anti-terror law. So okay, we practice this. We're gonna start off with the chant, jump, 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 terror law. 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 Okay, first up, we want to pull a mark from the Baltimore chapter of the Malaya Movement. Woo!
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for coming out to our first action here in Baltimore. We are small, but we are mighty. We are growing.
Like that?
Okay? What this bill is about silence. The broad, sweeping, ambiguous terror bill not only threatens Filipinos in the Philippines, it threatens Filipinos here in America and across the world. Look, I don't know about you, my first encounter with a fascist dictator was back in grade school. Mrs. Bly kept telling me that I had to stop talking and sit up straight and be in line. And you know what? My DNA, it wasn't within my DNA. Right? It wasn't within my DNA to just keep quiet. We come from a long line of resistance. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes when I get overwhelmed and I'm thinking like, there's so much work to be done, there's so much work yet to do, I think that I just try to remember that we are a small blip on the radar of a long continuum of resistance. Because that's never worked. Since the beginning of time, you can't take away people's stories. What the anti-terror law attempts to do is to take control of the narrative and to take away people's stories. And when you don't give people the opportunity to have space in the storytelling space to delineate and describe their own narrative, people resist. And that's what we're here doing today. Okay? We will not be silenced. We will not stay quiet. We will not sit still. We will agitate and we will resist.
Right.
Okay? Not only for the lives of Filipinos in the Philippines, for the lives of Filipinos here, for our black brothers and sisters, for our brown brothers and sisters, for our trans brothers and sisters. Okay? So, I'm going to take us out with a chant. When Filipinos are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When black folks are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When brown folks are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When trans lives are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
Thank you. Love.
Thanks, Mark! Thanks for your words and for setting the tone. And as you know, or maybe don't know, Baltimore City has been importing teachers from the Philippines. And according to one paper, employs about 200 Filipino teachers presently. The next speaker we have is lovely Diana from the Baltimore Teachers Union to deliver a statement expressing solidarity for this action. Please welcome Diana. It works, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Diana Duterte and a proud member of the International Committee of the Baltimore Teachers Union. We as educators condemn the actions of President Duterte as he continues to repress the voices of those fighting for human rights, the environment, workers' rights, and gender equality. It really disturbs me to see how another fascist uses this global pandemic to gain control of his community through violence and repression. Many of the Filipino teachers here in Baltimore City moved here for the opportunity to build a better life for themselves. And as teachers working with some of the city's most vulnerable children, Their work has enriched and inspired many lives as well. As a child of Filipino immigrants who left their country for more opportunity and freedom to live out their dreams, I am committed to use my voice to help raise those voices silenced by the actions of the Filipino government. Let's channel that same faith and energy that our teachers and parents have dedicated to bettering our lives and raise our voices against the anti-terror law and make sure that the Philippines Human Rights Act gets to the U.S. House and Senate. Thank you for inviting me here. Give it up for Diana! And now, I want to welcome Gordon, representing Maryland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, a local Philippine solidarity organization affiliated with another international organization, International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Welcome, Gordon!
Hello, everyone. On July 3rd, Duterte signed into law the anti-terror law. He tried to show his strength by saying that he could label anyone he wanted a terrorist, to crack down on dissent and criticism of his government, which currently leads Southeast Asia the most COVID cases, has ranked up murders to the high 30,000s in his 4 years of fascist reign, and has kowtowed to the US and Chinese imperialists. So, as standing in solidarity with the Filipino people, it's important to connect their struggle with our struggle here. We see calls here to defund the police. We see calls to crack down on the impunity that they hold up, and they can murder with impunity. They can arrest people. They can assault, terrible things that we've all stood up against. In the Philippines, the same situation. The Philippine National Police is trained by the Israeli Defense Forces, who also train the Baltimore Police Department. These struggles may be thousands of miles apart, but they're connected at their core. So, in order to truly stand against the corrupt system we have here, U.S. imperialism, we have to stand with the Filipino people, whose rights and liberties are being taken away by the terror law. What we're doing right now, if we're doing the Philippines, could be considered terrorism. I look around and I don't see terrorists. I see people standing against tyranny there, standing against fascism, and standing for people's rights, standing for the liberation of the people. So, in America, we like to hold up free speech and freedom of assembly as our First Amendment, our Constitution. We see lots of politicians talk about how free speech is being cracked down upon by the left. But we don't see them speaking up against the actual crackdown on free speech in the Philippines and across the world. So, in order to really demand justice for victims here, we have to demand justice for the victims of the Philippines. People like Jennifer Laude, a trans woman in the Philippines who was murdered by a U.S. serviceman in 2014. Joseph Pemberton. He still has not gone to jail even though he was charged, convicted. He stands at a U.S. military base enjoying the luxuries that Jennifer Laude cannot. Here in Baltimore, we've seen people murdered by the Baltimore Police Department, and those policemen, we don't see them in jail. That same system connects the two countries. So let's stand against U.S. imperialism and stand for people's rights. So in with the chant, not another nickel, not another dime. Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Duterte's crimes.
Not another nickel, not another dime.
No more money for Duterte's crimes.
Thanks, Gordon. Next up, I want to call on Miranda from an organization that's doing the important work of building a vibrant anti-war movement here in Baltimore amongst the youth. As Gordon mentioned, it is almost impossible to be against police brutality and racism here and turn a blind eye to the injustices that the U.S. armed forces are inflicting across the globe. So let's welcome Miranda from Youth Against Foreign Racism.
Duterte are best friends, and they work together to oppress and exploit workers and oppress people, poor people around the globe. They do that here in the United States, where we have a heavily militarized police force that murders black and brown, oppressed and poor people in the streets with impunity. Abroad, youth are being targeted, especially by the terror law, because so much of the struggle is youth and students in the Philippines. The Philippines is also something like 75% youth. So it's really important to look at how the youth are kept down by the U.S. through student debt and going through education and still not being able to afford to have a job or live somewhere and fall into renting crisis. In the Philippines, it's very hard to get a good education. It's very hard to, even if you have an education, find a paying job. So there are a lot of similarities. Trump's opposition to Antifa is also an attack on the youth movement here in the United States. Through ROTC, children in schools are recruited to the military and they're sent overseas to kill people that they have more in common with black and brown and oppressed people, poor people, than they have with the people that are exploiting them. So anyway, it's really important that youth be involved in the struggle against imperialism, because that's this friendship between the United States and Duterte and with Israel, like Gordon mentioned. Youth are an integral part of this struggle. We make up some of the most oppressed factors. So many black, brown, and trans and LGBTQ two-spirited people and indigenous people are on the front lines in the movement here in the United States and in the Philippines. So I'll end with a chant. From Baltimore to the Philippines, stop the U.S. war machine. From Baltimore to the Philippines, stop the U.S. war machine.
Thank you, Miranda. We share the same view that the anti-war movement must essentially be an anti-imperialist and anti-racist movement. We view organizations like Youth Against War and Racism as continuing the tradition of solidarity that the ordinary working class people of the U.S. have shown time and time again with the oppressed peoples of the world. We remember the Anti-Imperialist League, of which Mark Twain was an active member, that created a movement in the U.S. to oppose U.S. colonialization in the Philippines and worked hard to raise the awareness of the atrocities that U.S. soldiers were committing against the Filipino people during the Philippine-American War. Next up, get ready, we have Alec from the Socialist Unity Party. SUP is a really important organization that unapologetically and clearly advocates for socialism as the alternative to the current system we have now. That simply is not working for the majority of the people, the 99% of any country. They open up the conversation of what is possible beyond advocating for just a longer chain under capitalism. We're happy to have them here to deliver their solidarity statement. Let's give a warm welcome to Alec.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Alec, here with Revolutionary Greetings and Solidarity from the Baltimore branch of the Socialist Unity Party. We are a revolutionary socialist organization dedicated to the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of true working class government, the only true form of democracy. So, as I said, we're a revolutionary socialist organization, and one of our core tenets is international solidarity, and that's why we're here today. And in particular, international solidarity with those struggling for national liberation, like the struggle currently going on in the Philippines, that has been a struggle waged for years. The front of Yankee imperialism of the United States is broad. It starts here, with the war on the black nation and the struggle of the black community in this country for self-determination, national liberation. We're seeing it right now. The streets of Minneapolis, The streets of Atlanta, Los Angeles, the black community is fighting for their own self-determination against this racist government. We see Yankee imperialism in its war, its embargo, its economic war in places like Cuba. Its coup attempts in Venezuela. Its successful coup attempt, unfortunately, in Bolivia. We see this everywhere. We see it in terms of 2 satellite states I really want to focus in on. I'll start with Israel, a fascist state propped up by the U.S., funded by the U.S., hell-bent on the super exploitation of Palestinian people. That's their only goal, and frankly, the connections between Netanyahu and Duterte are immense, overwhelming, and scary. They wage endless war on the working class. Israel doesn't even like Jews. 18-year-old Jews who refuse to be drafted in the military are tortured and sometimes killed. All that country is a fascist U.S. puppet state, an outpost in that part of the world to wage war and oppress people. So then we come to the reason why we're here, and why Socialist Unity Party stands in unflinching solidarity with the struggle of the Filipino people for democracy, working class government, and self-determination against U.S. imperialism. Duterte calls this an anti-terror law. This is not an anti-terror law, as we all know. This is an anti-worker law, an anti-farmer law, an anti-union law, an anti-student law, and an anti-legal worker law. Brandon Lee comes to mind, a legal worker from San Francisco who was shot by Duterte's fascist government while doing the good work, fighting the good fight there. This anti-terror law is just another way for the U.S. to assert its agenda through its puppet, fascist dictator Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, and we stand in unyielding solidarity against it, and we will fight until that fascist dictatorship is no more and this anti-terror bill is gone. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, last, it is my honor, it's an honor to call up the last speaker who will be closing out the program, Andre Powell from the People's Power Assembly. Woo! PPA is a member of the International League of People's Struggle. The PPA has been a consistent solidarity ally for more than 3 years, often making the trek to Washington, D.C. to attend rallies in front of the Philippine Embassy. So, come up to the mic, Andre.
Good evening, sisters, brothers, and siblings. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Baltimore People's Power Assembly. These names come to mind. Ferdinand Marcos. Oops, oh, I thought that was the feedback. That was the car horn. Ferdinand Marcos. Rodrigo Duterte. They are one and the same. They are puppets propped up by U.S. imperialism, as our previous speaker just spoke and stated so very well. U.S. administration after U.S. administration, no matter whether it was a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, the President and the members of Congress have continuously poured billions of dollars of taxpayer money into these dictators in the Philippines. In the 1980s, there was a call and a struggle by the people of the Philippines to get rid of Ferdinand Marcos because of his terror, particularly against leftists and socialists and unionists and movements of the poor mass organizations fighting for a just Philippines, a Philippines without terror and murder. The Philippine army under Marcos would go out and wantonly murder using the same principles that Duterte is using right now. So history in the Philippines is repeating itself again and again and again. And it could not do it without the money that pours into it that the U.S. Congress passes and designates to go to the Philippines dictators year after year after year. When Marcos was ousted in the late 80s or early 90s, he was replaced by Corazon Aquino, if I'm correct. Corazon Aquino was then, I believe she was removed from office also, and eventually led back up to this, a number of decades later, this dictator Rodrigo Duterte. His anti-terror law is very similar to what one of the presidents of the U.S., Richard Nixon, tried to pass back in the 1970s. It was called SB 1, meaning Senate Bill 1. And leftists and progressives in the country organized a movement to beat down SB 1. So this terror bill here is very similar to what SB 1 was. Richard Nixon wanted to give police authorities all around the country a free hand at suppressing, arresting, even quietly killing anyone that Richard Nixon deemed a terror to his, a threat to his presidency. And we see the child of Richard Nixon, Rodrigo Duterte, doing the same things with this anti-terror law. Alec just mentioned so very well that it was a law against unionists, against activists, a law against progressives to be used to give the go-ahead for death squads that already exist in the Philippines, but to try and give those death squads legitimacy as they wantonly murder activists fighting for democracy in the Philippines. I gotta catch my breath here. So, the People's Power Assembly firmly stands on the side of the working class, the peasants, the organizers in the countryside, the people of Mindanao, which over the past 2 years has suffered such atrocious atrocities at the hands of the Duterte government. Many, many killed. For many, many decades, there have been thousands of people that have been disappeared in the Philippines. Most likely, they have been murdered and buried somewhere. And it wasn't only the Duterte administration under Marcos, under Aquino. There are thousands upon thousands have disappeared in the Philippines whose loved ones are still waiting to hear it accounting. So the People's Power Assembly of Baltimore stands with the movement in the Philippines, and we say victory to the people of the Philippines under, correct me if I get this wrong now, under the National Democratic Movement. Victory to the Philippines, sisters and brothers. Down with Duterte. Thank you.
Hold on, Andre. Thank you, Andre. And thanks everybody for showing your solidarity and support here. We just have a couple more things up. We're actually opening the mic up to anybody who wants to say something, to say a little bit about why you're here and to express, your outrage against Duterte. And after that, we're going to close, but please don't leave until we have a chance to get a picture with everybody, because we're going to send this to our partners in the Philippines so that they can be inspired and know that even as far away as Baltimore, people know about the anti-terror law and are with them in the struggle. So does anybody want to say a few words? More than welcome to. Okay. So that concludes our speaking program. I want to thank the people attending today's action and to let you know it doesn't end here. We are working working to essentially cut off U.S. military funding to the Philippine Army and police. We want to end U.S. support for the Duterte regime. We're trying to get the Philippine Human Rights Act introduced in Congress and would love for people to get involved. So if your organization is interested in learning more about what you can do to support, please approach me or any other Malaya Movement Baltimore member or visit humanrightsph.org. We also want to announce that there's another Global Day of Action happening Monday, July 27 in Washington, D.C. This march and car caravan is to counter the lies Duterte will be spewing during his annual State of the Nation address. Filipino activists in the Philippines and around the world also mobilize on that day to show and voice opposition, especially against this administration. So thanks again. Please stick around for a quick photo op, and there's another quick surprise after that. So does somebody want to direct us in how we should stand?
The harbor, please. And our banner holders in front and crouching and lowering down a little bit if they happen to be exceptionally tall. Let's get our hand signs up. Heck yeah. Come on out here. Get close, guys. Sardines. Oh, wait. Just kidding. Social distance. Be responsible. From Palestine to the Philippines.
Stop the U.S. war machine.
From Palestine to the Philippines.